an exclusive interview with Fang Xinghai, the Vice Chair of China's Securities Regulatory Commission, about China's openness in the financial sector and what are the new policies coming up.
When world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course amid the chill of global changes. See the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
You're watching World Insight. I'm here in Boao for the Boao Forum for Asia. On the occasion of the Boao Forum, we had a one-on-one exclusive interview with Fang Xinghai. One of the reasons for that is very clear. That is, Chinese President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of Boao Forum has pledged reform and opening up measures and policies regarding the financial sector. Mr. Fang, as the Vice Chair of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, has explained to me what are the details of these policies and what's likely to be the timeline of implementation.
Once they're implemented, the Chinese financial sector will be much stronger, much more vibrant, and much more international. And if we continue on that direction, I think China's financial sector has the capability to change the landscape of the world financial market.
There is the so-called increasing the equity gap and also opening of more space for the international financial institutions, opening up the insurance industry, and many of the others. But the question is, how fast? What pace? What are the barometers? What is the timeline?
I know this is something that a lot of international firms are very concerned with. As the President said, what we promised last November when President Trump came to Beijing would be implemented in full by the end of this year. So this is a firm timeline. And as far as the CSRC, which I work for, is concerned, we will implement what we promised by the end of June. Now, the President also said that China would open up in insurance more and in capital markets more. And you just stay tuned.
He used the exchanges with the foreign capital market.
That's right, yeah. So you just stay tuned. Concrete measures, again, with timeline, will be announced very soon.
We have heard from many foreign financial institutions that they are very excited about the news. Of course, at the same time, some of them have a bit sense of cynicism because they thought they have heard news about it earlier. So I guess the question is not only communication, but also transparency, leading up to the real eventual implementation and result. So what is likely to be the step-by-step transparency revealing to the outside world what we are doing and how we are doing it?
You mentioned, some outside observers and international firms. We're kind of little disappointed about sort of slow progress, right? Now, to be fair, I think they have a point. We did move. It's not true that we did not move at all.
We did
in the
move.
past few years, we did move, right? So, for example, in my area, originally a foreign firm can only own 33% of a JV securities firm. A few years ago, we increased that percentage to 49%, right? But of course, 49 is not enough because they are still not in control. And then we announced last November that we would increase it to 51%. And then in 3 years' time, it will be 100%. We are making progress, but I agree that we could have done it a little bit faster. But to the second point of your question, 2018 will be an eventful year for China's financial sector. And the president said, very perceptively, he said, history always has a way to concentrate a lot of events into one year, and that year would be a standout year. I think 2018 would be such a year.
This year. So you're already rolling up your sleeves, huh?
That's true.
Work harder,
and,
as the president said.
Stay tuned. There will be a lot more coming.
But, Mr. Fang, when we are talking about the efficiency and the speed of reform, on the other hand, we should also talk about the stability and the safety of China's financial systems, because you also have a goal. So how can we, on the one hand, making sure of the speed, the reform itself, on the other hand, don't forget our original goal either. So that's quite a balance.
You're very right. I mean, as we open up, as we innovate in the financial sector, stability is always another goal that we keep in our mind.
Particularly if you have more opening up.
It goes both ways. Sometimes when you open up, you bring in a certain element of risk. On the other hand, when you open up, actually brings in stability as well, because you bring in more capital, for example, and that increases stability. You bring in more sophisticated practices, and that brings in stability. But of course, you also bring in a lot of speculative, perhaps, activities that will increase the risk. So we always make sure that the financial sector in China can progress in a stable way. And I think we are very well positioned to achieve stability in China because, as you know well, our government is a quite strong government. We take preventative, preemptive actions in a timely manner, right? And also in a way that is quite decisive.
Right.
So if you look at the past 40 years, for example, China is perhaps the only developing country that has completely avoided a big financial crash. I mean, we have instabilities, we have jitteries, but we have avoided financial crash. And I think that is not a small achievement.
With the institutional reform, of course, security is still on the one hand, but on the other hand, the banking and insurance are being put together.
Yes.
So what would this mean? Particularly, for example, Mr. Fang, your relationship with your colleague from the banking and the insurance areas.
I think the new structure of financial regulation is clearer than before. In regulation, you regulate basically two things: financial markets and then financial institutions. And with banking and insurance putting together, the regulation of financial institutions, financial firms, are a lot more integrated. So you can erase the regulatory gap between these different institutions. The CSRC has been kept intact, I would say, because our original task was to regulate financial markets, and that remains our task.
Well, China reform and opening up, as President Xi said, 40 years anniversary, this is a big year. And you said yourself earlier, this is going to be an eventful. I think that has a lot to do with the 40 years.
Yes.
But the question is, at the very beginning, we got the guts.
Back in 78.
Back in 78, right? We had nothing. And we had nothing to lose. But now we've got a lot compared to what we had before, of course. So do we still have the guts?
That's a good point. When you were very poor, you tend to be very revolutionary. You had nothing to lose, as you said.
You want to try everything, and you can try everything.
Now you are quite well off, right? And you have a lot of achieved results already. You don't want to waste all of them, right? So that's right. We got to be thinking more, right? Planning ahead in a more careful way. Remember, President Xi said one of the features of our reform and opening up over the last 40 years was that, on one hand, we cross the river by touching the stone. On the other hand, we also do this overall planning, right, for reform. And that is very much a feature of our reforms. And I think going forward, the kind of top-down, careful planning would be a lot more important than, say, 40 years ago, right? Now, as we proceed in a more careful way, on the other hand, we also have a lot more resources at our disposal than 40 years ago, right? So we can do a lot of bigger things today than we used to
What
be
are the
able to
bigger
do.
things you are having in mind?
Well, I mean, just give you one example. And 40 years ago, we did not even have a securities market, right? And the market was only established about 28 years ago, right? Now, our markets, whether it's the stock market or the commodity futures market or the bond market, are already among number 2 and number 3 in the world. So our size is very big, and it's increasing every day. So we are very attractive to the rest of the world. So we can use that huge size of the market to attract a lot of institutional investors to come to China. This is something that we could not do many years ago.
But China also wants to emphasize that the market will play a decisive role.
Of course.
On the other hand, China has a very strong government. And the government could put out measures that will be quote-unquote attractive to the international investors or to domestic firms to be listed here in China. So how do you see that, an advantage or disadvantage?
I would think if we can play the role of the government well, it's an advantage, right?
To you, what is quote-unquote well?
The government has to be very wise. You cannot intervene all the time, right? And you have to intervene in a wise way. And when you do it in a wise way, you can, first of all, you can maintain stability, which is very important for the financial sector. And secondly, you can coordinate the different forces in the society, in the system, to make certain big reform and opening up happen, right? In a lot of countries, for example, reforms are very difficult, right? Because the different branches of the government, they are kind of interlocked with each other. They cannot move, whereas it's not the case in China. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that government is like the big brother. Right? It does not overplay its hand. And in President Xi's speech, there's one sentence which is very, very important in my view. And he said we should not force other people to buy or force other people to sell. And I thought that was very, very perceptive and very much needed at this point. Because China is so big, right? If we always play, the force that plays our size, right? And force other people to buy or sell, they have to do it. But that's not the best way to open up.
But I wondered whether within your circle of friends and colleagues, you have to debate about this all the time. I mean, it's easy if you use administrative measures. You got things done very quickly. You seem to have a great result within a small period of time. But of course, the long-term impact, it is another issue.
Yes.
But I wondered whether people know it very well, particularly when they have short-term interests or goals they have to achieve. So this long-term and short-term, always a struggle, I would assume, Mr. Fang.
That's right. I mean, there's always this trade-off between long-term and short-term.
Do you have fierce debate?
Well, it's not very much manifested in internal debates. Usually, people make that kind of trade-off, in a unspoken way, I would say. Right? That's how bureaucracy operates. But the good thing about our system is that, we have one ruling party, right, that is in power for a long time, and President Xi certainly is a very long-term thinker, right? And he cares about the long-term interest of the country. So at that level, we do have a very long-term goal. And that makes this short-term, long-term trade-off very much in favor of the long-term outcome.
Having said that, though, Mr. Fang, I do have one question also related to the latest development between China and the United States. Of course, it is a trade conflict. It's not necessarily related to your field, and yet it has a connection to your field. We see the turbulence going on in the international markets. On the other hand, if the two economies, the biggest in the world, are not necessarily seeing eye to eye to one another, there's going to be big problem in the financial markets. So, Mr. Fang, what do you make of the latest? Did I hear
you know,
when
some country announces certain tariffs, you notice that the financial markets of that country actually got hammered.
Absolutely.
Very much. So I guess the lesson is clear that in this very interconnected world, things go both ways, right? And you have to be very careful about the negative impact on your own economy when you try to hit another economy. So best way to resolve these disputes is through negotiation.
But there is financial risks, as we say.
Well, of course,
How can you avoid, if you are thinking about thinking the long term, if the other party want to pick up a fight, how can you avoid and think prehand about preventing the risks?
Well, you make your...
That's the Chinese goal, isn't it?
I mean, there are always
you
two
play
ways.
the chess
One,
and you think about that way.
Well, there's always, so two aspects, to this question. One is that you do communicate with the other side in the advanced, in much earlier, right? In a proactive way to make sure that you understand each other. But sometimes, not all the communications can work out, right? So if there's a real fight, then you get really very well prepared. So for example, in the financial sector, you make sure your financial system is robust, right? Can withstand certain outside shocks. If your financial sector is very much fragile, for example, if asset prices is very high, there's a lot of bubble, then you cannot withstand that kind of shock. So make sure that your system is stable.
So make sure your own things is
you're very
put into
prepared.
order.
Yeah, prepared. If you have to fight, then you have to fight.
That's the best way to do it. Mr. Fang, what a pleasure to see you here in Boao.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much, sir,
good luck
for sharing
to
your time.
CGTN.
Thank you so much, sir. That's Fang Xinghai, Vice Chair of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, talking to us about the latest in China's open-up policies regarding the financial sector. You're watching World Insight, coming to you from Boao, our special focus on the Boao Forum for Asia. We'll be back after this.